Dad, why are there so many people who don't care about others?
Son, sit down here with me. Today I want to talk about something that we sometimes overlook, but makes a huge difference in our lives and in our relationships with others: empathy. I know you've probably heard that word many times, but I think it's worth discussing what it really means and how practicing it can transform the way we live and see the world. Empathy, son, is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's more than just understanding what someone is going through. It's truly feeling it, trying to see the world through their eyes, and that's not easy. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own problems and thoughts that we forget that everyone around us is facing their own battles too. But when we practice empathy, things change. You start to see that everyone, in some way, is struggling with something, and sometimes all that person needs is someone who understands them. Remember that time you told me about that classmate who was always in a bad mood, a bit distant? I know you thought he didn't like you or that he was being rude. But when you found out he was going through problems at home, you started to see him differently, right? That's the magic of empathy. When we understand what someone else is going through, our reactions change. Suddenly, what seemed like rudeness or coldness transforms into something we can comprehend. And often that understanding opens the door for us to help in some way. Once Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 22:39. I believe this is one of the greatest teachings about empathy. Because to love your neighbor, you need to put yourself in their place. You can't truly love without understanding what the other person feels, what they need. This doesn't mean you will solve everyone's problems, but just being there, showing that you understand, makes a huge difference. Sometimes what people need most is someone who listens without judgment, without trying to give quick solutions, but simply showing that they are by their side. Let me share a story I read about Mahatma Gandhi. He was one of the greatest examples of empathy the world has ever seen. Once, during difficult times in India, a woman came to Gandhi asking him to tell her son to stop eating sugar because he was eating too much and harming his health. Gandhi looked at her and asked her to come back in 2 weeks. The woman, confused, left. 2 weeks later, she returned, and finally, Gandhi told the boy to stop eating sugar. The woman, curious, asked why he hadn't said that earlier. Gandhi replied, "I needed those 2 weeks to stop eating sugar myself. I couldn't ask your son to change if I wasn't doing it myself. Look at the depth of that, son." Gandhi knew that to ask someone to change, he first had to feel what it was like to make that change. That's empathy. It's not just giving advice or an order. It's understanding what the person is going through, living it. Because it's easy to say what others should or shouldn't do. But putting yourself in their place, feeling the same struggles and challenges, that's what transforms everything. Empathy is powerful because it connects us as human beings. And the truth is that everyone, in some way, is going through something. Sometimes we look at someone who seems fine, but inside, they're dealing with difficulties we can't even imagine. And when you act with empathy, you create space for those people to feel that they are not alone. No matter how big or small the problem, when someone feels understood and when they aren't being judged, it gives them a tremendous strength to move forward. Now, I know that there are moments when empathy feels difficult. Sometimes people can hurt us, act rudely or selfishly. In those times, the first impulse is to react in kind. But I want to remind you of something. Every behavior has a story behind it. Sometimes, the person who treated you poorly is going through a pain you can't see. Maybe they're dealing with a loss, a frustration, or an insecurity that makes them act that way. It doesn't mean you should accept everything, of course, but trying to understand where that attitude comes from can help you respond with more calmness and understanding. Remember the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover"? That's very real. Sometimes what we see on the surface doesn't tell the whole story. When you practice empathy, it's like opening that book and trying to read what's behind it. And you know what's interesting? When you put yourself in someone else's place, it not only helps the other person, but it helps you too. You start to see the world with more patience and tolerance, and that brings a lightness to life. Suddenly, you realize you don't have to react with anger or frustration all the time. You understand that everyone is trying, each in their own way. This reminds me of a quote from the Dalai Lama that always touches me. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And he's right. When we practice empathy and compassion, both towards others and ourselves, life feels lighter. Happiness often comes from small actions like this. Because when we help someone feel understood, we ourselves feel a sense of inner peace. Now, son, I know you are a kind-hearted person who always cares about others. But sometimes, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we forget to practice putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. The world can be a very hectic place, full of distraction, but never forget to pause for a second and ask yourself, what might this person be going through? How can I be support instead of judgment? Just taking that pause changes the way you see and treat people. And one more thing, empathy starts with you. Be kind to yourself too. Sometimes we are too hard on our own failures and mistakes. But when we learn to treat ourselves with the same empathy we offer others, life becomes lighter. Don't be afraid to err or fail, but learn to look at yourself with understanding, just as you would with a friend going through a tough time. So, my son, remember this. Empathy is one of the most powerful tools you have to live well with others and with yourself. It builds bridges, heals wounds, and reminds us that deep down, we're all human, filled with stories, fears, and hopes. And whenever you're unsure how to react in a situation, ask yourself, how would I want to be treated if I were in this person's place? I'm proud of you, your heart, your kindness. And I know that with empathy, you will be able to transform many lives, including your own. I love you, son.